Hey everyone, in this lecture we're talking about feminism and its waves. The primary thing we're talking about in this lecture is the women's movement. It may be relatively short, but one never does know. So, what exactly is the women's movement? Well, that's what feminism is. Feminism is defined as being the belief in the social, political, and economic equality of the sexes, and the social movements organized around that belief. Feminism can be divided into either 3 or 4 waves, and they're frequently referred to as first wave feminism, second wave, third wave, and then fourth wave feminism. There is some academic controversy as to whether there is or is not a fourth wave of feminism. I'll talk about that at the end of this. So first wave feminism was the earliest period of feminist activism. This included the period from the mid-19th century until women won the right to vote in 1920. Many of these waves, I think actually probably all of the waves, except first wave feminism, don't have a really cut ending point, but first wave did because so much of it was oriented around the women's suffrage movement to get women the right to vote. That was the major point of first wave feminism. With that said, there were other elements to first wave feminism that included advocating for access to both birth control and abortion. Really everything has changed a lot in our country over the last 150 years. It used to be you couldn't get access to condoms. There was no such thing as birth control pills. And the only people that could get legal access to condoms in many areas were married men or maybe married women if they had notes from their husbands. So it was intensely restricted. So advocating for anyone to have access to birth control was a big deal during that era. Preventing domestic abuse and the prohibition of alcohol were also key to first wave feminism. Sometimes, if you know anything about modern feminism, you may know that typically if somebody is a feminist, it's mediumly safe to assume they're okay with something like marijuana, right? So considering that first wave feminists were very anti-alcohol sounds maybe a little confusing. Well, the reality of the matter is that during that era, and there is definitely nuance here, but during that era, it was completely both socially acceptable to for men to be very heavy drinkers, and it was also acceptable for after they went out and drink almost every night to come home and beat their wives and children, right? Those were both socially acceptable elements in society during that era. So for that reason, prohibition of alcohol and preventing domestic abuse were kind of co-agendas in the early feminist movement. And like I said, that isn't a really clear-cut thing. The sociological and psychological data show that there isn't actually a direct correlation between alcoholism and domestic abuse. It's more of a complex phenomena. But with that said, that was part of the political landscape of this first era. Second wave feminism then started in the mid 1960s, continued into the 1970s, and really was very influential until the late 80s and a bit beyond. Like I said, there isn't a definite ending point for second wave feminism. Second wave feminism, especially if you look at the historic conversations about it, sometimes known as women's liberationism or women's lib. If you watch things like old sitcoms or things like what's it called, My TV, like the broadcast TV that's kind of geared toward older people, where you can see old sitcoms. They often call it women's lib, and those were the conversations during that era. Second wave feminism focused primarily on issues of women's equal access to employment and education. That was the primary thrust of second wave feminism. With that said, just like first wave feminism, there were many issues tied in there, including access to abortion. Roe v. Wade occurred during the second wave of feminism. Legalizing no-fault divorce. Prior to the second wave, you had to have a definite reason to want to divorce someone, and a judge could say, no, you two can't get divorced. And then challenging the objectification of women. And this cultural shift that we have, it still continues to this day, but the idea that women are not just things to be looked at as sexual objects. Every woman, while women may be attractive and people may want to look at women in a sexual idea, they are total people as well, right? And challenging that concept was a big idea for second wave feminism. Now, second wave feminism is potentially politically one of the more complex eras in feminist history. When people say that they, quote, don't like feminism, it's usually because they are thinking of the abrasive tactics of second wave feminism. So, and that's why it was called women's liberationism. The idea there being that women need to rise up and overthrow the male-dominated power structures. Very much a conflict theorist kind of idea, right? Now, you can say that that abrasivism was necessary for challenging those heavy power structures of the day. You can also say that maybe it was a bit much and gave some people negative attitudes toward feminism. Now, those are historic, strategic arguments. And many of the tactics used in the second wave maybe wouldn't work today. But within that era, male dominance was so heavy in that society that most academics, especially social movement strategist academics, would say that, well, the reason why they were so confrontational in second wave feminism was tied in with patriarchy and male dominance. Now, out of second wave feminism then came this side movement called male liberationism. So this was an idea that originated in the 1970s after second wave feminism got going, that there are elements in society that also cause challenges for men. Second wave feminism was only interested in talking about challenges for women, right? So in that, then, people that wanted to talk about the challenges of men were kind of on their own to go do their own thing. Now, the intriguing element of the male liberationism movement is that it broke up almost immediately, which is kind of intriguing. It broke up into what was called, and sometimes on some parts of the internet is still called, the men's rights movement, which is a group that felt that feminism created disadvantages for men. Now, these ideas in the men's rights movement are not nuanced. If you look back at historic footage of debates during the second wave era, male liberationists are making like very clumsy arguments like, well, if women go out and get jobs, then who's going to take care of these kids and who's going to cook my dinner? That's the kind of disadvantages that men's rights activists were talking about. If you update that into the modern era, talking about a controversy that occurred in the mid-2010s called Gamergate. A lot of men's rights people kind of cropped up around there talking about, because there were real conversations occurring about objectification of women in video games. And again, men's rights people were saying things like, well, if I want to buy a video game that objectifies women, then I should be able to do that. And there's nothing wrong with that media because that's what I want. Those are similar. That's kind of what the updated version of that being is in kind of the modern era. The pro-feminist men's movement then, also kind of intriguing. And the pro-feminist men's movement isn't really around anymore, but you'll see why it isn't around when we go on to our next slide. This was a group that felt that sexism harmed both men and women and wanted to fundamentally change society's ideas about gender. Now, that sounds like something that is a pretty common idea in our modern society. So why did it go away? We had men saying, hey, I hear you feminists. I hear what you're saying, and I kind of agree. Like, you want to go have a job, and I want to have a relationship as a guy, right? I'm talking as a guy. I want to have a relationship with my kids. And maybe I want to be a stay-at-home dad, right? As part of my ideas as to how patriarchy and sexism in society is hurting us as men. Well, that idea, while outside of second wave feminism, then created a conversation with second wave feminism that would eventually create third wave feminism. Third wave feminism is the third. It occurred third. It really blossomed in the mid 1990s. Some people argue that it is still continuing to this day. That it states that all people have the right to express their gender as they see fit. Now that includes gender behavior. That includes sexual orientation and sexuality. That includes gender identity issues, applying both to cisgender people and transgender people. It includes anyone can do their gender however they see fit, is the idea. Additionally, then, third wave feminists examine the ways that race, class, and sexual orientation change the experience of being a woman, a man, a non-binary person. So, how does my experience as a heterosexual white man vary from the experience of a heterosexual white woman? Now, that's something that second wave feminists talked about. But third wave feminists also then are interested in how the experience of a heterosexual black woman is different than that of a white woman, and then maybe a lesbian black woman, how her experience would be different than everyone else that I just mentioned, right? That's called intersectionality theory, and that's a big concept in third wave feminism. Additionally, then, the third wave feminist, as I alluded to, is interested in not only the experience of women, but also the experience of men, the experience of non-binary people, because this is the gender of everyone, right? And a major difference between second wave feminism and third wave feminism is that the theory itself, maybe not necessarily the people, because I know some people that would consider themselves second wave feminists, very inclusive of LGBTQ plus people, but the theory associated with third wave feminism is much more inclusive of the identities of non-heterosexuals than that of second wave feminism, largely because a lot of ideas have changed between second and third wave. Now let's talk for a bit about this fourth wave thing. Fourth wave feminism really, and again, I'm not an absolute expert on this, I know a lot about it, but the big difference between third wave and fourth wave feminism is a shift in tactics surrounding advocating for gender equality. So between the early 2000s and today, we have seen, obviously, a massive advance in social media technology, all kinds of internet communication technologies. And the major difference between the third wave and the fourth wave is not so much that of philosophy or that of theory, but the shift in tactics. And if then that shift is so major that you consider that to be a difference enough to call it a new wave of feminism, then go for it. Then yeah, fourth wave feminism is a thing. I personally, from an academic standpoint, would be more convinced that fourth wave feminism is a whole new wave of feminism if there were a significant advance in the theoretical aspect of that, as we saw in the difference between second wave and third wave. But I could be wrong there. I absolutely could be. I know a lot, but I'm not an expert specifically on that. But those are our 3 to 4 waves of feminism. If you have any question on that, please let me know. And yeah, good luck. Good job. Thanks for listening.